welcome back to Following Noah on a Stormlight podcast. This week is our Wind and Truth preview chapters on our 7th week, and we are in chapters 12 and 13. Tim, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
David?
I'm doing well. Been busy, but happy to have more chapters every week.
Indeed. We have one Kaladin chapter and one Shallan chapter with a little bit of a Kaladin end page there and the end of day 1. So let's roll intro and discuss Wind and Truth. All right, where else to start besides the epigraphs? We have 2 new epigraphs from Wind and Truth, but because this is the end of day 1, the entirety of day 1, David, I'm going to throw it to you. Did you want to read the whole excerpt?
Yeah, I think that'll put everything kind of in context if we just read through everything as if it were one full thing. So I'm gonna do that now. I should have known I was being watched. All my life, the signs were there. I first knew the wind as a child, during days before I knew dreams. What need has a child of dreams or aspirations? They live and love the life that is. The wind told me before she vanished that it was the change in Odium's vessel that restored her voice. I wonder, perhaps it is the new storm making people begin to reconsider that the wind is not their enemy. I have read that in ancient days, the wind often spoke to both human and singer. It would then mean that the wind stopped talking, not because of Odium, but because of people who began to fear her, or to worship the storm instead. As a historian, I find such nuances relevant. As a philosopher, I find them enticing. Regardless, the events surrounding the cleansing of Shinovar are of specific relevance, and I am doing my best to record what I can discover of the wind's own words regarding them. Though, now that the wind and heralds have vanished, I have only 2 sources who can speak of these events. They are my witnesses. However, the wind did not think like a person does. This should not surprise anyone who has familiarity with the Spren, though such things are less common now than they once were. All agree the first key moment came when Kaladin Stormblessed listened. Though not an edge dancer, he did a fine impression of their oaths. The second moment had happened already, when Szeth himself decided to take upon him this quest, the one that would shape all our futures. For a while, the contest of champions was to happen in the east, a different contest was to happen in Shinovar, and one that the wind swore was equally vital, perhaps more so. I was not with them. I did not know of their quest. Yet I will do my best to recount their story and that of the wind, for they were her champions.
All right. So it's not Syl.
Not Syl.
Mm-hmm.
With what we got this week. I was not with them. I did not know of their quest.
That really narrows it down.
I mean,
it depends. Yeah, I guess it depends on how literal you take that.
Right.
I'm thinking Hesina's now top of my list, because I don't think she would be in on like, here's Kaladin's exact mission. She just knew he was leaving for something, but it doesn't mean that she knew of their quest.
Sure.
I'm also leaning towards this is just someone we haven't met yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, like, are we going to see a third bondsmith, and could this be that author?
I did not know of their quest. That's a really interesting qualifier, because I almost want to say that rules out everyone we know in the tower. Like Hesina, Navani, whoever you want to talk about that's important in the tower, I feel like that line kind of disqualifies them.
Definitely not Dalinar or Navani. Probably not Yasna. Yasna would know. Now we see that Shallan and Adolin know about it.
Mm-hmm.
So like, which all of Bridge 4 know he's off to do something different, and he kind of talked about it. So it wouldn't be Sigil. as was speculated earlier.
Is this a singer? Is this I'm sorry, Venli?
Is it
Leshwi?
Venli?
It could be. It read the whole way through. It's definitely the voice of a scholar. And I think if you're taking it, the I do not know of their quest is just the literal first meaning that comes to mind of I didn't know that they were doing anything. Then yeah, maybe Venli is one of the only people left there. But I think it could mean like that the character didn't know much about it, and maybe they didn't know what the true quest would be about, which is the wind, which no one really knew it was about the wind except for Kaladin and Dalinar. So I could see this being Shallan. She definitely knew she was being watched.
That's
That
true.
qualifier makes me think Shallan, but yeah, there are a lot of options here.
We know it's not a herald because it says the heralds all vanished. Because I was thinking it could have been. I'm thinking there's a little bit of clues, which could be false clues, but there are clues that this is someone who's been through all the desolations. Because the little line about not as common these days.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Is this someone who lived in the days where it was more common? Or are they just saying, well, I'm a historian, so I would know that because I'm a historian. So
Sure.
But there's not a whole lot of history to, like, they've lost a lot of the history of like when the desolations were actually happening. So sounds like someone speaking from more intimate knowledge of that.
The more I look at this, the more I'm leaning into Leshwi, actually. Because we had that teaser at the end of Rhythm of War that she had some relationship with Honorspren or something like that. I knew the wind as a child during the days before I knew dreams. What, like, does that mean visions? Does that mean being banished to Braze? Like, what? There's so many different ways you could go with this, that knowing that whoever this person is didn't know of the quest is almost more frustrating, because now, I mean, it's eliminated some of our top suspects, but now we're like back to the drawing board. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I hate the answer of it's someone we don't know, but I'm honestly starting to lean towards that. Or maybe someone like the scholar who was reading those romance novels, right? Like, there's no way. Like, I hate to say, there's no way we can guess who this is, but that is definitely a possibility. But if we're talking about someone of the people we know about, who could it be? Like, I feel like the list is shrinking fast based on just that one epigraph. I actually like. I was so annoyed when I read that one epigraph. I was like, oh no, all my theories. Yeah. I feel like there's a reason he left that for last. But
yeah, specifically with that one, I do think Brandon Sanderson's having too much fun with this. He's just writing these up and splitting these up. Like, hey.
Can I get
no, it's not any of the people you were thinking. Sorry.
Exactly. I've got a quote from Oathbringer. I'm listening through it now that is actually connected to this. When you said Leshwi, it made me think of it. Because Leshwi, she flies around through the wind, through Odium, but a very similar connection to the wind, so to speak, that the Windrunners find themselves. So this is still talking to Kaladin. Everyone is connected, Kaladin. Everything is connected. I didn't know you then, but the winds did. I am of the winds. The winds are of honor, she said, laughing as if he'd said something ridiculous. I skipped a little bit there. We are kindred blood. You don't have blood, Kaladin replies. And you don't have an imagination, it appears. She landed in the air before him and became a young woman. Besides, there was another voice, pure, with a song like tapped crystal, distant yet demanding.
That was Leshwi?
No, that was still talking to Kaladin.
Oh, okay.
But it's Leshwi flying through the winds. This is all about the winds. That last part we could talk about for a while, perhaps. But really, this just reminded me that the winds and honor are very connected. So it makes sense that the wind being very, like literally coming from honor. Syl is talking about how right before that, she says, "Your parents are like I remembered." But she'd never seen her parents. She just had this memory, so to speak, from the wind to go off of. So I could see this being Leshwi watched by the wind, not necessarily knowing what's going on first, and over eventually coming back to the wind. I could see Leshwi perhaps bonding a windspren or something along those lines, and going down this path of the historian and the scholar after the fighting is done.
Is this kind of hinting at like a question that I feel like we haven't asked enough, which is, where did the fused come from?
Sure.
They were people, presumably, like the heralds were, before they became fused, because we have Odium saying that he wants to make Dalinar fused. So it's not something that's limited to just singers. It's more like a cognitive shadow thing, which we know
Right.
shards can make cognitive shadows. So she would have had a life before becoming a fused, and then would have died at some point and became a cognitive shadow under Odium, controlled by Odium. So her relationship with an honor spren would have been during her life before being a fused, I would think, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm
Mhm.
with you there.
And then this would have been before humans bonded honor spren.
Mhm.
Or before humans were even there at all.
Yeah, true. So, but why would Odium? Well, no, Odium came with the humans.
Mhm.
Do you think that she was alive during that time, and then Odium made her a fused? Like, how much time did it take? Because I feel like there was a sequence of events. Humans arrive, they're there for quite a while. They bring Odium with them, but they're in Shinovar, and they stay there for a while. Then they decide to spread out to the rest of the world. That's what causes the wars. And then
Right.
at the same time, the Spren abandon the singers for the humans.
Mhm.
And then Odium's like, well, I can send you Void Spren to fill that gap. And it kind of switches sides to the singers.
Right.
Whereas Honor and Cultivation switch sides to the humans, which is really weird if you think about it. But like, how much time passed there? And when would Leshwi have been? Did I say the right name? Leshwi have been alive to then become a fused?
I don't know if we can really know. It's just
Yeah.
guesswork.
I know.
So I think it's a single generation because we know some of the heralds, they were on Ashen before and they were part of it being destroyed. And then they became heralds, which was a response to Odium, right? So that would have been like all in that single generation.
Okay.
Does that logic make sense, or am I missing some of the details
What-
here?
How do we? What herald was on Ashen? Do we?
Ishar.
Does Ishar say that?
Ishar was, yeah. Well, we know that from Coppermind. I can check where it gets that info from.
Was Ishar the one that destroyed Ashen?
I think so. Or he's involved.
Oops.
Yeah.
Oops, indeed. I'm trying to find where it says it on Coppermind. Here, life on Ashen and the expulsion. Can I just read directly from Coppermind? Is that all right?
Yeah, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like most of the heralds, Ishar was born on Ashen prior to mankind's arrival on Roshar, over 7,000 Rosharan years before the True Desolation. He was either a king, scholar, or general. Ishar was the first to be tricked by Odium into experimenting with the surges that eventually left Ashen uninhabitable and desolate outside of a few hospitable areas, and forced the population to flee to Roshar, and forcing those that remained on Ashen into floating cities. who was also the first human on Ashen to discover how to world hop, enabling humanity to leave the planet when they needed to flee. There's a lot of citations here. Rhythm of War chapter 14. That's interesting. So that's cited for 7,000 years before the True's Desolation. I don't know where in that chapter it would say that. Rhythm of War chapter 76. This would take a whole research session to
Yeah.
pick out, but I'm trying to find the like where we learned about him being. Rhythm of War chapter 111 has a bunch of citations. Yeah, I wonder if that's the one with Ishar in it. Sunlit Man has a citation. Interesting.
I just finished that book 2 days ago.
And then on Arcanum Unbounded, the Rosharan system.
Yeah, well, that's just generally talking about Ashen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They're just citing like the name of.
Okay, yeah, and then Becoming Heralds, another section of the Coppermind on the Heralds. It says, a quote from the Stormfather. It says, humans could never win when the creatures they killed were reborn each time they were slain, and so the Oath Pact. So the Oath Pact was actually a response to the Fused.
Okay.
Those events happened much more quickly than I expected then. Unless Ishar had enough magic to be immortal already. Which
Right.
happens a lot. So
Yeah, I mean,
if
especially
he was,
especially with what we learned in Sunlit Man, all you have to do is, be close to a shard, have enough BEUs or whatever, and then you can reach the heightening.
Yeah, I mean, enough BEUs in your soul and you're ageless. So, I mean, it's quite possible Ishar lived through quite a while. But then why would he need to become a herald if he was already ageless?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, unless the Oath Pact had more, I feel like the Oath Pact relates to the Desolations in some way, but like forces because the Oath Pact also involves, hey, the Fused can't return until one of us gives in to the torture. I don't know if he was expecting torture at the time, but he was expecting that the heralds would get together and force the Fused to stop being reborn, which then ends the endless war.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they just keep coming back. So even if Ishar was ageless, he would still want the Oath Pact. So I still think that there could have been significant time involved.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious what you guys think of that last part of the quote I read, what that could mean. Syl says, besides, there was another voice, pure, with a song like tapped crystal, distant yet demanding. Do you think she's talking about the voice of the wind? Because the context of the quote, she's talking about the wind, how she learned about Kaladin from the wind. Or I had a thought of maybe this is I forget the name. The one that they're looking for in the spiritual realm.
Janat?
Yeah,
No, sorry.
no.
Mishram.
Yeah. And it made me think of that tapped crystal. She's trapped in a gem, but I don't know if that's. I might be taking that too literally.
Maybe. I was thinking it could be cultivation also, but I mean,
Yeah,
it being the wind makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
the wind is certainly high up there, but pure with a song like Tapped Crystal makes me think more along the lines of a pure tone cultivation, that type of thing. But it could easily be the wind. I mean, the wind could also have its own tone that wouldn't be unreasonable.
Mm-hmm.
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 Just based on my thought that maybe there's, our third bondsmith wrote this. Any thoughts on whether we're going to see a third bondsmith in this book?
It would surprise me if we got Bondsmith number 3 before the end of the book. I mean, unless there's somebody already set up for it, which I can't think of one.
A lot of people suggest Lift. I think that
Right.
would surprise me just because Lift already has Windle.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly Lift was touched by cultivation and would be
Sure.
a candidate.
Yeah, I think it could happen. I think it's unlikely. I think it'd be like the first two books. Kaladin comes in at the end and wins, and it would be like that again. So I think he would choose a different path. Plus, I'm coming around to thinking of cultivation as more of an antagonist than a protagonist.
Yeah.
So I think if it did happen, it wouldn't be a good thing for the good guys.
Does this book have antagonists?
Yeah. I mean, with like the 20 minutes that we talked about the contest last week, I'm beginning to question that, any of this actually matters, and whatever's going on in Shinvar is really the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just more thinking like Sanderson rarely does pure antagonists.
Sure.
Yeah.
Maybe Ellen's father. What's his name?
Oh, Straff.
Straff Venture. Maybe him, but like it's usually there's like justification on many sides of a war, and just we root for our main characters, but I think cultivation has her own motivations that probably don't align with our main characters or the singers.
Right.
She's got her own things going on, and sometimes they're helpful and sometimes they're not to someone like Kaladin and Dalinar. But yeah, definitely a wild card for sure. I think she helped kill Honor, so
I am also leaning into that theory more and more. Anything else on the epigraphs, or should we get into the chapter?
no, I think we have more questions about the epigraphs than when we read the first sentence. So
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
All
no,
right.
let's jump in.
So we get a Kaladin chapter, which I don't actually remember the title of, but it's like the farewell to Bridge 4 is the consensus of the chapter. Beyond the Brands is the title of the chapter.
Mm.
And let me just say this at the top. I am a sucker for a good Bridge 4 chapter. And I acknowledge that this might be the last one. Like, straight up, this might be the last Bridge 4 chapter we ever get. But it was a good one. I really did enjoy everything in this chapter. There were callbacks to the first book, callbacks to the second book, seeds that were planted early on in the series were delivered on in this chapter. I really enjoyed it. What did you guys think?
I liked it. I really liked it. Part of me is in the mindset though of I want answers, and a lot of this chapter didn't move things forward, and so I was feeling a little frustrated with that side. But really, the payoff it's good, and you're like tying things up and moving forward, and that's what this book is all about.
this to me, like as I was reading it, I was like, oh, this is the conclusion to a 5-book arc.
Right.
This is the conclusion to when Kaladin first got put into Bridge 4. Right. That thread, this is where that ends. That really was how I felt. Like, okay, we've concluded the original Bridge 4 arc. We know where kind of everyone has landed, and they're happy where they are, except Zigzal. Which we know Zigzal has a much larger arc for himself to do. So, which may or may not be a good thing, but
yeah, I actually want to talk about Zigzal because obviously we know about Sunlit Man and the Dawn Shard, everything that happens to Zigzal in that book and before that book. I'm really curious if Zigzal is removed from Roshar by the end of this book or by the end of book 10. I'm really interested if he's the leader of the Windrunners for like 3 books further and then is gone, or is that by the end of this book? Do they try to equip the Dawn Shards at the end of this book? He accidentally hurts Auxiliary, or however all that works. Is that this book, or is that book 6, book 8.
I have a lot of thoughts on this. If you have fewer thoughts, Tim, you can go first, or I can just go.
You go ahead.
Okay. So we actually know from Sunlit Man, we know a lot that Sigil has to do on Roshar before he leaves.
Yep.
He needs to reach 4th ideal Windrunner, at least 4th ideal Windrunner, because he still has his Windrunner plate. He needs to reach 4th ideal Skybreaker and become the leader of the Skybreakers. And he needs to get a Dawn Shard and use it for some epic ending climactic thing.
Yep.
I don't think that's happening this book, because this book ends with the Contest of Champions, it seems.
Sure.
So, like, there's no way that happens in 10 days. You don't speed run the 4th ideal of the Skybreakers from nothing. So I think a lot of this is back half stuff.
Well, hold on. If there were any ideal to speed run, the 4th ideal of the Skybreakers would be that one, because that's a either you do it or you don't thing. You set a goal and you accomplish it or you don't. So if there was one to accomplish in 10 days, like Zeph's about to do, it would be that one.
I would think the Light Weavers would be the quote easiest if you're
yeah. Light Weavers are cheating.
Well, I think Hoyd sped run the Light Weavers.
Yeah,
all the way.
No wonder Hoyd picked a cryptic, because he's just like, yeah, I can just say truths and lies to this thing all day, and we'll be like, oh yeah, that's great.
Still, I think that the thing I wanted to follow up with on this was, I think he's struggling with his 4th ideal right now. We're assuming he's 3rd ideal. I
assume so. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
that's
probably
easy. Pretty easy assumption to make.
Yeah. So every Windrunner struggles with 4th ideal, and I think you can see them struggling with it in the way they talk. And Sigil's like, I don't even know if I belong in Bridge 4. I don't know if I belong as a Windrunner or Radiant at all. I definitely shouldn't be a leader. He's struggling internally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's 4th ideal related. And I think near the end of this book, we'll see him speak the 4th ideal, get his plate, and then his friend will be perma-killed or something, which will rip our hearts out. Yeah. So I think that's this book. I don't think we're then, going all the way to 4th ideal Skybreaker, getting a Dawn Shard and leaving the planet. Like, I just don't think so. But I mean, it's possible. It's a long book.
I mean, full Sunlit spoilers, obviously, but I'm curious if book 6, he's leading the Windrunners against Odium, doing his thing, whatever. Hoyd shows up with a Dawn Shard, and then like the Night Brigade shows up in a starship, and then he's on the run from there. So I'm curious if we're going to see all that, or if we just have to make those assumptions and he's not going to bother covering it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons I think I withhold judgment on whether Sunlit is truly a Stormlight spoiler or not is we don't know if any of those events happen in the Stormlight books at all.
Mm-hmm.
We might just get hints about that in Sunlit of things that happened in however long it's been since the end of book 10.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why I think he's comfortable writing that, because otherwise he's like he doesn't like to write himself into holes. To be like, I am forced to write this bit because it's already in a book that happens later. He doesn't like doing that to himself. So unless he's super, super confident about how books 5 through 10 or 6 through 10 are going to go, I don't think he would have written that in there as like, hey, here's a major plot point that's definitely happening in books 6 through 10, right?
I also lean into the idea that he's setting himself up for other authors to come in. Like he has whatever 12 books that he's set out that he definitely wants to cover before he retires or whatever, which is Stormlight, Mistborn Era 3, well, whatever else late Cosmere he wants to cover, 12, 20 books, whatever that is. But he's also setting himself up to where he can give an outline to another author and say, here's a story, go for it. Like, here's some details that you need to include, whatever, but the story's yours. So I'd be more leaning into that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a story that Sanderson's not even going to write, that maybe can take place after Stormlight 10, that
Right.
explains more of Zigzel's plot line. I'm perfectly happy with that, honestly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I totally agree. I think it either happens between 5 and 6, or it just doesn't bring any bearing into Stormlight.
Sure.
What's funny is we won't know if it's a Stormlight spoiler for what, like 15 years?
That's true.
I might be being generous with 15.
Yeah.
Yeah, optimistic.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Relaine and Renarin have their corrupted Truth Watcher Spren. Are they key to this book, or is that the back five?
Are we allowed to talk about the blurb on the back of the book?
Yes.
Doesn't it say that Renarin is in one of the plot lines?
Yes. Renarin and Shallan are hunting Mishram, I think.
Renarin joins Shallan and into the spiritual realm, something like that. I mean,
Something
I think
like
that's key.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what Relaine is gonna do. That's a really good question. Oh wait, doesn't Relaine join them?
I mean, Renarin and Relaine are going to be an item here soon anyway.
Mhm.
So that's not out of the question that he's just there with them.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can find that blurb.
Oh, yeah, it does say Shallan, Renarin, and Relaine are working to unravel the mystery.
So they have, and I guess this ties into our today's Shallan chapter. They have corrupted Spren. So I wonder if that means anything on the spiritual realm, or if that's purely a cognitive realm thing. Because then, based on what they figure out about Mishram and their John Knot and their corrupted Spren, they could go cure the Oathgate or re-imprison the Oathgate if we want to get technical. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I do want to talk about that. Should we get into that now, or do you guys want to say anything else about Relaine and them?
We can ebb and flow between them. You can go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious about the mechanics behind the Oathgate and the history. We find out they're Inkspren that have been manipulated in some way, and it just got me thinking. Wow, the cost of magic back in the day was super high. But like what I was thinking with the Inkspren, it's like they're bound in some way, kind of like the heralds are bound. But mechanics wise, it seems like it's more like a span read. Is that something that we talk about in Rhythm of War? I don't remember for sure. It's been a while since I've read that one.
Like Oathgate mechanics? Are you talking
Yeah,
about?
Oathgate mechanics.
They cover an Oathbringer when they're trying to when they jump when they're in Kolinar, they jump through the Oathgate. Then the Oathgate like won't let them back through, even if they wanted to, which they don't.
Mm-hmm.
They cover that where
Okay.
the Oathgate's corrupted and blah blah blah. They get to so we do get basics in Oathbringer.
Okay.
So I have a kind of a speculation that we see things like soulcasters, right, and whatever the healing thing that was used on Zeth by Nail. That was the way Fabrials were made before the idea of capturing Spren and gemstones was used by Navani and co. So, which is a very modern concept and like basically a new magic system. And so I feel like that was intimately related to the sibling and the siblings bondsmith at the time, where they would basically convince a Spren and say, hey, are you willing to become this thing to help the cause?
Right.
Are you willing to be a soulcaster? Are you willing to be a healing Fabrial? Are you willing to be, blah, blah, blah. And so she convinced some set of Inkspren to become the mechanism for the Oath Gates. And there's 2 at each gate, including 2 per gate at Eurythera, which for some reason I never realized. I don't know if that was already in the books, but it was that drawing at the end. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess there's 2 at the Oath Gates per Oath Gate at Eurythera as well.
Mm-hmm.
But
And then, sorry, go ahead.
so there's a black one and a white one. Is there an ink spren and like a spren of like the stone that they're using and they're working together, or is this 2 ink spren?
Shalon says they are both Inkspren.
But one is black and one. That's weird.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Inkspren come in black and white
Maybe.
varieties.
Could be.
Maybe like male and female equivalents, or just
or singer and human equivalents.
Mm.
maybe.
Or oh, go ahead.
But I was going to say, if you look at the picture, it's not always a black and white pair, right?
The ones further back were kind of gray, correct?
Yeah, I don't know if that's just like lighting thing where the gray ones are supposed to be white, or
I haven't actually looked at this picture yet.
I assumed that it was a lighting thing, but it is like very symmetrical, the ones that are white and the ones that are gray.
Okay, I haven't looked at this yet. I'm just laughing at the little arrow that says this pair looks familiar.
Mm-hmm.
They all look identical. Shalon, what are you saying?
No 2 of the gate spren are exactly alike.
Yeah.
I understand that, but in the little sketch here where they're, less than a little centimeter tall, that's funny.
Yeah. Well, that's
why
what
she
got
put
me.
the arrow.
Yeah. That's what got me thinking maybe they're like span reads where you're splitting a spren in half and bringing them in separate locations.
Mm.
And so maybe it's the same, either the same 2 spren in both locations, or maybe it's 1 spren in each location split in 2 somehow.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a good question. Like it does say, do they match their counterparts at each location? I have the same question. And if they do match, are they the same spren?
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
It's been divided.
I would go as far to say it's an ink spren and a spren of whatever they're using. A table, the stone tablet, whatever, they're splitting those 2 things and maybe even physically carrying that table to the Shattered Plains, to Aesir, to Eurythera, wherever, so that you can transport between them from then on after you split them.
I lost you at the table thing. I get everything else.
I'm just using that as like a phrase of like a slab of stone, basically.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Like a mesa would have been a better...
because there's a structure in in Shadesmar. That's what you're talking about,
right? Yeah.
So where does that structure come from?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. Yeah.
I was like, table spren are involved in transportation.
It was a poor use of word.
Yeah, we could just table that discussion.
Okay. I had kind of a follow-up thought, which is, it seems like both the sibling and Sja-anat have some way of changing spren, and they have to be willing to change. But then if they're willing to, then both the sibling and Sja-anat have the power to cause that change. Mm-hmm. And so what these ink spren have done is they're like, we chose to be these gates. We were happy to do so. But now we want to be free. And so we chose to allow Sja-anat to transform us. Mm-hmm. And so they're like, hey, now I'm not bound to only transport some people. I can pick and choose who get to transport. It's like, oh, goody. But,
yeah. Well, and they explicitly say that they'll let the singers in, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And given that they're ink spren, that means that they're intelligent. They have sapience.
Right.
So they are capable of making decisions, capable of being persuaded.
Yeah, at least they once did, like in their original form.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I'm actually surprised that they used Radiant Spren as part of the magic system beyond making Radiance. That's really interesting. I think this is our first example.
Wasn't it also the Spren for Fabrials? Or weren't they also Radiant Spren?
Are they?
Maybe
Not for regular Fabrials. Sorry,
Soulcaster.
the original Soulcasters.
Oh.
I thought they were Radiant Spren.
Yeah, I think you're right. Now that you say it, I seem to recall they're like, we looked into Shadesmar to see what Soulcasters looked like, and was it like Mist Spren or something? I could be remembering that wrong. But
Yeah, I'd have to go double check on what exact type of Spren it was.
it must be a Spren that gives Soulcasting, right? Ink Spren give transportation. That's Yasna Spren, right?
Right.
So it would make
Mhm.
sense that they could be used for the Oath Gates.
hmm
So which two Spren are soulcasting? Cryptics and
Lightweavers.
the Lightweaver Spren, which are
So Inkspren and Cryptics.
oh, oh no,
Mhm.
so it would be Ink Spren and Cryptics, but it wasn't a Cryptic, right?
Right.
Right. I also wonder about the strengths, and certain soulcasters can only soulcast certain things.
Mm.
I've got a theory, I guess I didn't realize until this moment, but I've had a theory for a while that the ones that can soulcast more have more intelligent spren that agreed to come together for this one soulcaster.
I was thinking you were going a different direction, which is a different Radiant Spren or different types of soulcasting.
Yeah, but then when you have one soulcaster that can soulcast everything, you would get that by multiple spren coming together. Was kind of what I was thinking.
Would they
Interesting.
be Dead Eyes, or are those like Oathgate Spren where they're just kind of hanging out?
There's a description of them in one of the books.
Rhythm of War, probably.
Probably. I wonder if Coppermind says.
We don't need to get more tangent, but if
Yeah.
you want to, we can.
Yeah.
Just as an aside, while you're searching, I wanted to say how much I enjoyed the visuals in both of these chapters, where Kaladin is, I think it's the first paragraph we get in these two chapters, where Kaladin is hovering above Urithiru. The high storm hits Urithiru underneath him, and he's watching the sunset. And then later, Shallan comes through the Oath Gate, and it's, I think it's still the tail end of the high storm, and Urithiru's lit up like a high rise, in New York City or whatever. Those visuals it gave me in my head were awesome. I really enjoyed those.
Yeah, a lot of good word pictures, as well as the literal pictures. I've been enjoying those.
Either of you listen to these chapters?
No. Did you?
I did. I listened to these chapters last night. Just as an aside note, Kate Redding reads a lot slower than she used to. I'm gonna have to speed her chapters up or something, because
Oh, really?
I thought that was interesting. Did you find anything, David?
I know what chapter it comes from now. Here we go. Let me start here. So this is chapter 9 of Rhythm of War, and she's thinking a lot about how these old Fabrials are so different from the ones she makes. And the ones she makes are super logical. They make a lot of sense to her. But soulcasters, they broke all the rules. For centuries, everyone had explained them as holy objects created by the Almighty and granted to men in an act of charity. They weren't supposed to make sense because they weren't technological, but divine. But was that really true? Or could she, with study, eventually discover their secrets? For years, they'd assumed no Spren were trapped in soulcasting devices. But with the Oath Gates, Navani could travel into Shadesmar, and everything in the physical realm reflected there. Humans being manifested as floating candle flames, Spren manifested as larger or more complete versions of what was seen in the physical realm. Soulcasters manifested as small, unresponsive Spren, hovering with their eyes closed. So that might have been more context than needed, but... And then, so the Soulcasters did have a captured Spren, a radiant Spren, judging by their shape, intelligent, rather than the more animal-like Spren captured to power more normal Fabrials. Thus, these Spren were held captive in Shadesmar and made to power Soulcasters. Is this the same, perhaps? So, they are radiant Spren, But it says they're small, unresponsive spren hovering with their eyes closed. So they're not scratched out eyes like a dead eye, but they're closed eyes. So that might
Right.
be some implication there.
They've
Taking a long nap.
they've like submitted themselves to be soul casters instead of, abandoned or whatever. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
No, she knows they're radiant spren, but she also calls them small.
Mm-hmm.
Small, and then she says by their shape, but she doesn't
Yeah.
say. So, are they different radiant spren? Or are they all the same type of radiant spren?
It's a frustrating description.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree.
Well, we know that, for example, the ink spren get huge when they become the gate spren. So
Yeah.
that their shape in Shadesmar can change depending on what fabural they become.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it's like Syl is more comfortable in a smaller form in the physical realm, but she grows larger in the cognitive realm. Maybe it's just a similar thing like that. It's the same spread, just a small version.
Maybe, but Syl can't choose to be a different size in the
True.
cognitive realm.
Yeah. It's like as a byproduct of becoming what they have.
It's very interesting. So it doesn't quite answer the question, but we do know that at least these really powerful fabrials are from Radiant Spren.
Yeah, there's something different about the energy that comes from them, perhaps, or like, is it the amount of investiture? Because more investiture, more sapience. Is that correct, or am I mistaken there?
I don't know if that's a bad conclusion to make. I don't know if it's very credible though.
We know that honor and cultivation specifically create the sapient spren, whereas the other spren are more like natural occurrences from what people are thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't, like, Syl was the last one born to honor, and then isn't the Stormfather supposed to be making them now?
Yeah.
That's why she's called Ancient Daughter, because she's the only one left who was actually created by honor.
Yep.
So that's very different than like a flame spren, being created by people thinking about fire.
Yeah.
Unless all spren were created by honor, or in cultivation. But maybe they're doing something like similar to splintering themselves, and so there's a lot more investiture involved.
Yeah.
And so there's sapience.
What'd you guys think of Shallan's armor?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you guys read it in your head, but Kate Redding, when she reads it, she goes, Shallan, 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 Shallan. She's a lot of fun with it.
That's how I imagined it. So I'm glad that that's how Kate Redding read it as well.
Yeah, similar. Just a young child with too much energy.
That's exactly what she was doing. Yeah.
It answers a lot of questions we had with answers we didn't even think about.
Mm-hmm.
Because Shallan being able to pick out a bead, that's exactly what she needs. It was her armor spren, of course. And she only starts doing that after she says that truth. So she unlocked her armor. She now has armor spren. The creation spren are like, I'm a bead. I'm this kind of bead. Right?
Yeah.
So I think it's really cool that the armor spren are useful in Shadesmar, even if they can't become armor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the synergy.
I'm wondering what Kaladin could do with Windspren and Shadesmar. Because those things are...
I also had that thought.
Yeah. He was already attracting them in Oathbringer, but he couldn't say the truth.
Well, okay, now I'm actually curious more, because in this chapter, as Shallan gets pulled back into the physical realm, she explicitly states that there's no wind in Shadesmar, and the return of the wind on her face is like refreshing or natural or whatever. So now I'm wondering if there's limitations to Windspren in Shadesmar.
They were described in Oathbringer pretty explicitly.
Were they?
They were there. I also remember at one point, though, the book said that Windspren were spent most of their time in the physical realm because of that.
Yeah, so basically everyone was super surprised that there were Windspren sightings because you don't see Windspren very often in Shadesmar.
okay.
Super rare because they just, yeah, like Tim said, they spend their time frolicking in the wind in mostly in the physical realm. Or so yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. If there's no wind in Shadesmar, why would they want to be there?
Right.
But if there's a Radiant and it's his armor spren to
Yeah.
be, so yeah, I wonder, like, that seems useful in a fight. If you're fighting in Shadesmar, like I was thinking about how the Radiants are super crippled in Shadesmar because they don't have their blades. If they hit the fourth ideal, they don't have their plate. But the plate can still be useful. Especially if it's, aren't they flying creatures, like big flying creatures? Like,
Yeah. Don't they? I mean, they hang out around the whatever helps the boats sail or whatever. I
yeah.
don't remember.
Oh, the Mandras.
Is that what they're called?
Yeah,
been a while
Glory
since I've-
Spren.
So yeah, it will be interesting to see if Kaladin enters Shadesmar in this book and what does his armor spren do.
Hmm.
I'm curious what Yasna's armor spren do in Shadesmar. I don't even know what a logic spren. I assume that Yasna's armor is made of logic spren.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah,
but I don't know what they
logicals.
look like in Shadesmar.
Yeah, I think we'll find at least one more. What the armor spren does.
Should we bring up that Yasna does not appear at all in day one?
That didn't surprise me. I assume like Kaladin and Zeth aren't going to show up in day 2. And we'll
Mhm.
spend day 2 with Dalinar, Yasna, Hoyd, like in the tower preparing for, you know, whatever. And we'll pick up with Zeth and Kaladin on day 3. And we'll kind of be alternating. That didn't surprise me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we'll have 3 splits: the people fighting, and then the people on the quests, and we'll have bouncing between those 3.
Yeah, I mean, we know how Sanderson wrote the book. He wrote 3 books and then weaved them together. So,
Yeah.
do you think we're going to get interludes before day 2?
Ooh.
I hope so.
Ooh. Okay, so related to that question, Michael Kramer reads the end of day 1 like he would read the end of part 1 or the end of part 2. He includes it in the audio. So it then made me want to bring up the idea again of, are we not getting parts? Or are we in part 1, we just don't know it?
I think we're getting days instead of parts. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we're getting like 1 interlude.
Well, I think he just needs a lot more interludes because he needs like 6 or 7 just for Ishik. So,
Oh,
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
Of course.
I wonder if Zeth's flash, because normally the flashbacks are kind of just randomly appearing throughout normal chapters. They aren't interludes. I wonder if Zeth's flashbacks will be between days instead.
Oh, yeah,
Cool.
interesting. And then also, are we getting interludes? Or sorry, are we getting interludes with preview chapters on Monday? Are we going to get interludes, or are we going to skip them?
Mm,
That's another question I had. We do have some interlude. We have an interlude preview already.
Yes,
Mhm.
and we
So-
also had interlude previews in Rhythm of War. We had Syl, we had Jean Not as preview chapters in Rhythm of War. So
I thought Rhythm of War was just part 1.
we had that Syl interlude before the book was out.
mhm. Yeah,
But
I
I think
remember that vividly.
wasn't it a separate I can't remember. I thought it was a separate preview and not like part of the pre-release stuff.
It may have been an early chapter reading. You might be right.
Because we have an early chapter reading already for that one interlude.
We have a couple too. Yeah, we've got
Mhm.
And then we have some Zeth flashbacks too. So
right. We have Seth flashbacks. We have a Hoyd interlude. I assume it's
is that a Hoyd
limited.
interlude? I thought it was
Yeah.
a chapter.
It might be yeah, you're right. It might be a point of view.
I think that's going to be a chapter in day 2.
I mean,
It could be interesting if there's differences.
it could be the chapter we get to on Monday because Hoyt and Jasna presumably are showing up to this meeting that Shallan's calling, and Hoyt might be waking up and checking, whatever. We'll talk about that when it comes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We have plenty to talk about on this one.
Yeah, we do.
I wanted to talk about Zeth a little bit.
Yeah.
I want to just read this quote from him because, first of all, Kaladin did not ask him a question. He said this unprompted, which I feel is really unusual for Zeth. He doesn't give up any information unprompted, but maybe that's growth for him. Finally, I returned to my homeland. Once rejected and told I lacked truth, I returned with knowledge that I was right all along. We have reached the end of days, and I hunger for something I cannot describe. Justice or reconciliation, condemnation or salvation. I don't know yet.
Actually, it's sandwiches.
True.
True. He hungers for sandwiches.
Pancake.
I left out Nightblood's interjections, but which were really funny. Yeah. This is like, I know he wanted to cleanse Shinovar. I thought from the very start, in my mind, cleanse Shinovar, I was like, well, that's ominous. Is he gonna just murder everybody in Shinovar?
Right.
But it sounds like he doesn't even know yet. Is he gonna condemn everyone and seek justice and just like go on a rampage? Or is he looking for salvation there somehow? That's really interesting. So he's not sure what he's gonna do there. Given how set he is on doing something there, I thought he knew what that something was, but he doesn't seem to.
So now that you bring it up, leaving a Skybreaker's ideal undefined seems really frightening, especially a Skybreaker from Shinovar who lives off rules. Leaving that as cleanse Shinovar. Okay, hold on. What do you mean, Zeth? That like, let's hold on, because if you're taking guidance from your sword here, cleanse Shinovar might mean nobody left alive. So yeah, now that you say that, I'm a little concerned.
I've been concerned since what, Oathbringer?
I think that's why Kaladin is along.
True. Yeah.
I kind of wonder if Ishara has already done half the work for Zeth in terms of murdering everybody in Shinovar, but
yeah. And I think Zeth is going to find out there's a lot more manipulation from the stone shamans and perhaps even them being manipulated by the unmade. And so it's really going to be like kicking out the unmade. More on those lines.
That's what I assumed it was. Cleanse Shinovar, get rid of the unmade, reinstate the proper rules, etc., etc. But that's not what he said. He did not write that down. Like, so I don't know.
Maybe he's just going to grab a whole lot of soap on the way there. Just
start scrubbing. Yeah.
Cleanse them like the rift.
Channel his inner tress.
Tress, yes.
I'm fresh off that book, so I had to make a reference.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, I also moving forward a little bit on like Kaladin exiting the love triangle. Yeah. I'm glad that was another tie-up moment. You're like, okay, we knew this was done a long time ago, but it's like officially done. It's tied up. It's moved forward, and everything's good. The only thing that kind of maybe hints that things could change if things are crazy is the promise at the end.
Yeah, okay. So before we even get to the promise, I want to talk about the hug. Because Shallan hugs Syl. And there's like Shallan has this little mental dialogue to herself of like, there wasn't much there, but I could feel her, but it was kind of weird. Anyway, moving on. And yet another episode where we're highlighting that Syl is pulling herself into the physical realm more. But it's not just for Kaladin now. Like, obviously she was showing herself to Oridin and Kaladin's family and stuff, but it's now Shallan, it's Adolin, like, and there's like a full conversation between it's like a person-to-person conversation between Shallan and Syl. So not something we've seen before.
Yeah, I mean, Silladin shippers are rejoicing right now. They're dancing around. But I will say
there was a handhold at the end of the chapter that was seemed a little significant.
Yeah. What I will say is this is very heavy-handed in terms of Sanderson foreshadowing. Sandershadowing?
Foresandering.
Foresandering.
Oh, yes.
It's too heavy-handed to just be like, this is what's happening. There is a twist here. He wants us to think one thing very, very, very badly.
So ever since you put that in the outline, it made me think. Everybody started to like Elokar, and then he died. Like the entire first half of Oathbringer, Sanderson's pulling Elokar back to, no, I want you to like this character. He's really just misunderstood. He's doing his best, blah, 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 dead. And so that Elokar death is supposed to mean something to the reader. So now that you're saying that Sanderson is overplaying this, I do wonder if Syl is going to be deliberately banished to the cognitive realm or die, or whatever that is. If we're pulling Kaladin and Syl so far together, that I agree with you. There's got to be something that's a twist here.
Yeah, whether it's a twist like, you thought I was doing that, but actually I'm doing this, or it's a twist like a twist of a knife as he stabs it into our hearts. But, they're heading towards Ishar. Ishar can do crazy stuff with connection, like insane stuff. He was going to steal Dalinar's bond with the Stormfather. Something weird's going to happen with Syl and Ishar being nearby each other.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. I don't like that you're right, but you're right.
And I don't want to read it.
Yeah.
And we're not going to get it in preview chapters. I mean, so you guys, just as a pause here, you guys are going to do your preview chapters, and then you're going to get the book and you're going to finish it.
Yes.
I have decided to read the preview chapters, go back to the beginning with Paul and Elliot, and read blind with them, excluding the preview chapters. So I won't know until April of 2025. So you guys get to know. I do not.
I feel so sorry for you.
You're doing this to yourself, so
it is true.
True.
It is. I mean, I'm not asking for pity. I'm just saying that it's. You guys will know much sooner than I will.
Yeah. You're going to have to mute some channels on the Discord.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to have to mute words on social media. Yeah. I've got a whole thing. I'm going to have to unfollow YouTube channels. Yeah.
Well, honestly, it might be a nice thing to not know, depending on what happens.
We kind of talked about this a little bit last episode, but up until last episode, in Sanderson I trust. But last episode, there was some odd inclusions that made me second guess. That being said, this episode, a brilliant rebound off some interesting inclusions from last episode. I loved both of these chapters this week, so I'm not worried.
Can we talk about reality warping around Kaladin?
Yes, and I think it's very important about who's saying that, because Shallan just had this 10-chapter sequence of not knowing a thing of what's going on, and then comes to Kaladin and says reality warps around you. I don't trust it for a second. That I don't believe a word Shallan says, good or bad.
Well, I feel like there's some truth to it.
What does she mean?
So I don't know. Have either of you read Wheel of Time, or am I alone in that?
Yeah, I've read it.
You have not, Trevor?
I read the first book.
I think I brought this up before, but Wheel of Time kind of has this excuse for why the main characters are so important and have crazy things happen to them, which is that there's essentially like the fate of those around them are tied to their fate. There's a whole, he goes into it a lot in terms of the mechanics almost, but it's kind of a philosophy of there's some people that are just important, and everyone likes to crowd around them and join their fate to theirs. And so obviously Sanderson finished Wheel of Time. He's a huge fan of Wheel of Time. He's one of the writers of Wheel of Time to an extent. So like, I feel like he's introducing that concept here of like, there's something very special about Kaladin, but knowing Sanderson, he would give it a hard concept. Something that's actually going on related to investiture or connection or who knows what.
Fortune.
So I think Shallan has been tapping into the spiritual realm, and she's realizing like, hey, there's something special about Kaladin here. And I'm wondering if, is Kaladin doing something similar to Shallan? Does Kaladin tap into the spiritual realm in some way? Or is he protected in some way by something that does tap into the spiritual realm? Like the wind, cultivation, I don't know, some shard.
Tanavast.
Tanavast, yeah, right. He's child of Tanavast. He's the only one called child of Tanavast. Like, is that related? Thanks for bringing that up, Trevor, because I didn't have that in my notes, but
no problem. Kaladin being the child of Tanavast sits right in the back of my head all 24/7. I think about it all the time and what it means.
You wake up in the middle of the night going, child of Tanavast. Where am I?
Oh,
Stormlight.
Yeah. I think if there wasn't the child of Tanavast references, I would think it's just, he's a main character. He's done some crazy things and has been really helpful for Shallan, and she's in a crazy mind state. And that's that. With Child of Tanavast, I think there could be more, but I think it's more Shallan's perspective of what he's going through rather than literally a mechanic.
I would lean into that because I've been burned before on Shallan point of view descriptors. And even in this chapter where she feels like she's being attacked by her own armor spren, I do not trust the perspective of Shallan or Radiant or Veil or whoever else you want to put in there.
Mm-hmm. They do a lot of lying in that circle.
But David, I do understand what you're saying, that Kaladin, I can't speak anymore. Kaladin tapping into fortune or directly the spiritual realm, whatever that means. Yeah, I could absolutely see that.
Yeah. I don't know. Do we want that to be true? Whether it's true or not, would that be cool? Like, I think it would be cool. It would explain a lot.
I think it could be cool, but I don't want it.
I'd be fine with it because there are prophecies and death rattles specifically about Kaladin, and that's fine. He falls through the rain speaking truths. He must pick it up, the tower, the crown, the spear. Like, all those are directly about Kaladin and his ideals and stuff like that. So I'm fine with it. I have no problem with that.
Odium took special interest in Kaladin, and Odium loves tapping into fortune,
right,
to try to plan things out. I'm surprised that cultivation has kind of avoided Kaladin.
Yeah, the cultivation, I think actually might be involved with Kaladin more directly than that, because I always think back to the letter from Maraise to Shallan, that Shallan's brother was there from the Skybreakers hunting a Night Radiant, not Kaladin, or probably not Kaladin is what the letter says, but I think there were people trying to take Kaladin out before. I think more people knew about Kaladin before Kaladin did. I'll just say that.
They could have been going after Tien and
True.
succeeded.
True.
It turned the battle, the tide of the battle against Tien's side. Like, because the Skybreakers picked a very specific side
Right.
to join. Why that side? Like, it was literally just two squabbling like nation states, right? Like,
And, like, a full
Sadeas,
shard
Norse.
bearer shows up randomly.
Yeah, there wasn't any shard bearers there before. Like, they're like, we're gonna send a shard bearer to turn the tide of the battle against Kaladin's side, and then maybe that'll get Tien killed or something. Like,
Right.
I don't know. They also went after Amaram.
Yeah, I was
Could
gonna
have
say,
been that.
didn't they assume it was Amaram
They did
who
assume it was Amaram.
taking it?
Yeah.
So maybe they succeeded by accident, but could there have been rumors of things Tien was doing? I don't know. There were definitely rumors about what Kaladin was doing, right?
Mhm.
Yes. There were definitely rumors about Kaladin. And yeah, they could have seen a cryptic or whatever, but
It's interesting though.
Yeah.
any
Go
ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up something about Shallan's armor. There was some talk on Discord of like, why as soon as Kaladin spoke the fourth ideal, his armor was ready to go and doing amazing things. Shallan gets her armor, and then they're like, we're inexperienced. We don't even know how to form right. We're going to cut your clothes and your hair.
Yeah.
And there was talk like, why the difference? And to me, it's like, okay, well, they're bonded to the specific radiant. And Kaladin knows a lot about armor. Right. And he knows how shard plate works, even though he's not worn it. He knows a lot about it. So like his Windspread would inherit that from him. Whereas Shallan knows nothing about that stuff. And she pretends to via Radiant, but she doesn't actually know. So her armor is as confused as she is.
Right.
That's my explanation. I wonder if you two have other explanations or if you kind of agree with that.
Yeah, I agree with that in principle. I think there's a small possibility that Kaladin's Windspread had been armor spren before. But because there is a line that says, oh, we've never been armor before from her Shallan's spren. But I think you're most likely correct. Of both of them, they've never been armor before, but they use the person's visualization to take on this form, and Kaladin would do, I would imagine, a much better job than Shallan.
Yeah, I don't know if I read too much into it, but that's what I would. I'm with you, David.
Yeah. I thought it was an interesting point, though. Like, there's an inconsistency there, and the only reason that inconsistency would exist is if Sanderson had some mechanic in mind. Also, there was a hint that Shallan is going to dual wield Pattern and Testament.
Yeah.
We finally get confirmation that at least this time when she summoned a Shardblade, it was Testament.
Yeah.
And then she started thinking about shields. And we know Kaladin used Syl as a shield during his battle against Zeph.
Well, and Sigil uses auxiliary as all sorts of things after fourth ideal. So
yeah, so I think Shallan is going to learn Shardblade plus Shard Shield combat in some way.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be awesome. Speaking of Testament, I noticed she was able to use Testament to go through the Oath Gate. Yeah. Which gives me more hope for Maya and the other spren with broken bonds. There's things that can be done, and it can go further than we expected.
It's interesting because dead shard blades cannot be used, and that was one of the things, because we've been for years and years we've been trying to figure out which shard blade was Shallan using in Words of Radiance at different points. Was it ever Pattern? Was it always Testament? When was it Testament? When was it Pattern? And one of the things brought up was, well, it had to be Pattern when she activated the Oath Gate, because only living shard blades can do that. but now she's just activated an oath gate with Testament.
Yep. Blew that theory out of the water.
So
I mean, yes and no. She's coming to bear with her truth since then. So I would still lean into that it's probably pattern at that point. But I mean, you know.
I think he's opening a door, because I feel like he probably was also struggling with like when like he didn't know.
Yeah.
As an author, he was like, I don't know. And so by making us an explicit reference to Testament using the oath gate, I think he's leaving it open to himself to explain, like retroactively explain what was what.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've actually had the thought that Sanderson actually kind of wrote himself into a corner on this one, where he, at the end of Words of Radiance, Kaladin says his third ideal and then gets to summon the Shard Blade. So then you're asked the question, okay, does Shallan already have the third ideal then? So I don't think Shallan was supposed to have had the third ideal by then. And then he goes kind of oops and tries to retroactively put in Shallan's previous oaths and all, you know, there's plenty of people who've discussed this. So
Mm-hmm.
I just think Sanderson actually just made a mistake on this one and is trying to paper it over. It doesn't really bother me.
It happens. A series this big.
Yeah.
You change
Yeah.
your mind on one thing and now suddenly there's inconsistencies.
Definitely.
But as fans, we want to try to figure out what actually happened, you know? Work through it.
I've got one last thing. Did you have anything, David, before I brought this up?
We covered everything I wanted to.
Perfect. Let's talk about the multiple invasion forces, possibly. What do you guys think of that statement that was said of, do we know how many oath gates are going to be invaded? Do we need to worry about all of them? Do you think it's just going to be this one?
Is that in the chapter?
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Shallan, I think it's Shallan makes the hypothesis that there's probably other invasion forces if there was one at this oath gate. So she, I mean, that's part of the news that they fly off to Navani and Dalinar at the end of the chapter to get the coalition of monarchs or whatever. So, I mean, if there were other invasion forces, that probably would make me feel better about this random one next to the Azir Oathgate, because that would just mean, okay, Reyes was moving a lot faster than we thought in Shadesmar, preparing like a wide assault across Roshar in general. And so the fact that we found this one was less like lucky chance and more, well, we were bound to find one in Shadesmar because they're assaulting the Oath Gates like as we speak. So I'd probably like it better if all of our Oath Gates are about to be attacked.
I think that's true. The quote from Shallan is, "We need to scout the other Oath Gates." So clearly she's thinking the same. Yeah, I could see this being a heavily coordinated, very highly planned attack. Like he's sending Ja-Anat to all the Oath Gates to free them, so that he can use them, because otherwise he could not. We were speculating, like, how did he know he'd be able to use the Oath Gates to get back? But if he had sent Ja-Anat to all the Oath Gates to make that happen, then he planned it out, and he's got a force going to every single one of them.
Which makes me think less that Urithiru is under attack and more that Urithiru is severed by the end of the book. Like, Reyes was making a move to block in Urithiru as opposed to retake Urithiru or whatever. So by the end of, day 8, we might only have 2 Oath Gates to use, the Shattered Plains and Shinovar or whatever. So that is a more interesting idea to me, that we thought we would unlock all the Oath Gates, but turns out they all have an army sitting on them. So now we only have, X amount.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's going to be more than one, but I think it makes sense for it to be just one or two, because the amount of forces that they would need to pull through and move out would be noticed. So I think it will be more than one, but it makes sense, even if it is just the Aesir Gate. That's one where Odim's forces were doing really badly. So it would make sense that they would send one there.
Anything else?
Not
I
for
guess
me.
I want to conclude with just that, kind of what I said earlier at the beginning. These chapters really felt like a conclusion to me. Like it felt like they felt like end of book chapters to me. So he's snipping off threads already, and it was a weird feeling to be like so early in the book, but be reading what really felt like the end of a book.
Yeah, I can see that.
Did you get the same vibe when you were reading it?
Yeah,
A little
yeah,
bit.
it was definitely ending an arc. I think that'll be good because the Centerlanch is always so full of so many things. It'd be hard to get in all of the arcs that he needs to close off throughout the end.
Yeah, we talked about this in maybe the first or second episode. We had concerns that we wouldn't be tying up the book in time if it was day 1 through 10. So, if we're tying up things early, that's fine with me.
Yeah.
All right, let's conclude there and reconvene next week. Thanks for joining me, David and Tim.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We'll see you next week.